his overcoming of addiction says so much about him and what he was able to give the end of his life to. And it speaks to the redemption that comes from faith in God. Many people were saddened by the passing of Friends star Matthew Perry. He was, of course, Chandler Bing on the very, very famous 90s sitcom Friends, and he lost his life. I was never a huge Friends fan, to be honest. I know the general thread and kind of the relational ties on the show. I've obviously seen a lot of episodes, and Chandler, a lot of people made this point. He was kind of the heart of the show, and Matthew Perry is best known for that role. But I think his most significant contributions to the world at large came later in life after struggling through extreme addiction as a celebrity and coping with all of the things from being a celebrity and trauma from his past and everything else, having some near-death experiences and becoming sober and helping other people experience that as well. And like so many people who have stories of coming out of addiction, part of his story was spiritual transformation. The Christian Post says, Matthew Perry recounted encounter with the presence of God in his book Before Death. Actor Matthew Perry, famously known for his role as Chandler Bing in the hit NBC sitcom Friends, died in his Los Angeles area home at the age of 54 on Saturday. And since the news of his death, the actor's comments about God and the afterlife have resurfaced. In his 2022 memoir, Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing, Perry is very candid about his past addiction issues and near-death experience following a burst colon due to opioid abuse. Perry had undergone 14 stints in rehab, 15 stomach surgeries, and dozens of attempts at detox. In his autobiography, Perry revealed that at his lowest point, he turned to God in desperation. God, please help me. Show me that you are here, he recalled praying. Following the prayer, he described having an encounter with the presence of God, which caused him to weep uncontrollably. I wasn't crying because I was sad. I was crying because for the first time in my life, I felt okay, he noted. I felt safe and taken care of. He saved me that day and for all days, no matter what, Perry testified. The comedic performer revealed that up until that point, he spent years struggling with faith, but that encounter changed everything for him. And this isn't the only time that he is on record talking about this. He frequently talked about his faith. And one time he sat down to talk about his memoir and to talk about the book with famous atheist Bill Maher. We'll take a look at how that interaction went.
First of all, I'm so glad you're here. Plugging a book, because a lot of people did have you in the Deadpool.
Yeah.
Maybe you.
Yeah. I had a horrible accident about 7 years ago. I was given a 2% chance to survive the night.
Right.
They didn't tell me that, obviously, because I wasn't really there, but they told my family. And I was put on a thing called an ECMO machine, which you having read the book, you would know what that is.
Yes.
But it's
No, I did. I took notes. I underlined it.
oh, no, I believe you. But they call that a Hail Mary. That's what they do when they put you on an ECMO machine when it's a Hail Mary. And 5 people were on ECMO that night, and the other 4 died, and I somehow made it.
Well, God is a fan.
Yeah, I mean, I know your feeling about that, but I know that
I'm a fan. Maybe I'm God.
Okay. I know that once you've referred to it as a force, and
Very interesting that
I believe
when push comes to shove, even Bill Maher, who is famous for being an atheist. I mean, obviously he's famous for being a political commentator, but he's the one who, put on the whole documentary about how, Christianity is just so silly. It's the dumbest thing. When he talks about the Christian religion, he paints it like it is just the absolute arena for morons and rubes and people who are too dumb to do anything other than just put their faith in some kind of fairy tale. And yet, when he hears a testimony of somebody, like we just read, 14 stints in rehab, 15 stomach surgeries, should have died that night. People don't even know how he didn't die that night. 8 different people were in the same situation. He's the only one who made it. And Bill Maher, who does not believe in God, still just automatically, almost subconsciously, before he can even catch it coming out of his mouth, has to say, God must be a fan of yours. I like how Matthew Perry goes on to confront Bill about how he doesn't actually even believe in God, and then has an interesting take at talking with this famous atheist about it.
I believe that a higher power, there is a higher power.
Right.
I believe a very close relationship with him that's helped me a lot. And
somebody's on your side.
Yeah.
Everybody's on your side. Everybody's glad you're here.
Yeah.
And I must say, the human body, reading that book, and I did.
So he says, Bill, I know how you feel about the whole God thing, and it's kind of a joke. And then he talks about it in terms that Bill can understand, that it is this higher power. And people understand that because that's the first of the 12 steps, is your life has become unmanageable. And in the first couple of steps, you have to admit to some kind of higher power just for your life to be manageable. But he says, him. I believe in him. And so not just this higher power, not a pronounless force out there, not something that is impersonal, not a deist view where it's just, the universe, man, or, whatever's out there. It's a him. And we know from his other statements that his actual belief is in God. And his overcoming of addiction says so much about him and what he was able to give the end of his life to. And it speaks to the redemption that comes from faith in God. Often your greatest contribution to the world can be found in the redemption of your weakest seasons of life. And this is a theme throughout Scripture, that your weakest seasons and your worst moments and your biggest disappointments, all of those that we see as setbacks, can actually become setups for your greatest contribution to the world. And that comes from spiritual renewal. There is a clip from Jordan Peterson, who is known, as someone who comments a lot on political matters and social matters. But before anything, he was an educator. And this is an older video of him, and it's a lecture that he was giving. And I want you to hear how he talks about addiction.
The addiction has a cognitive component. It's full of thoughts and desires and wants. And, you may have to rebuild your whole personality in order to get that thing cornered. Religious conversion, for example, is a really effective treatment for alcoholism. That's partly why Alcoholics Anonymous works for the people for whom it does work. But religious conversion, which is total personality conversion, is actually one of the few things that we know of that's an effective treatment for alcoholism. We don't know how to.
One of the few things that we know, and in more recent days, I've heard Jordan Peterson say that some form of spiritual conversion, spiritual transformation, is really the only thing that truly works to get people off some of the higher levels of addiction. And alcoholism is certainly very, very serious addiction. It reminds me of what Paul wrote to the church in Rome. He said, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, and then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is." And Jordan Peterson, he spent years studying specifically alcoholism. He is from a pretty remote province in Canada where it's very dark and very cold for a big portion of the year. Somewhat like in other areas like that, alcoholism is rampant, and he studied it. He wanted to understand it. And he says that the addiction almost has a behavior, it almost has a personality to it, and that the renewal has to happen by this transformation of your mind. And this is exactly how Paul says to transform your life. It's not from the outside in. It's not from what you can accomplish by your own will or skill sets or behaviors. It's from the inside out, the renewing of your mind. And a lot of people, they get to these dark seasons and they have these deep regrets and these things that they're just not proud of in their life. And some people become despondent, kind of give up on life altogether, and they allow it to create guilt, and that guilt spirals in their life. And typically guilt spirals end up pushing you right back to the very behaviors that are causing the guilt in the first place. And the story of redemption and the promise of spiritual renewal is that the worst seasons of your life can actually be the very root of your greatest impact in the world. One time, Jesus showed up and healed a demon-possessed man. And once he is healed in Mark's gospel, Jesus didn't let him come back with him because he had work to do where he was. He said, "Go home to your own people and report to them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you, because your greatest contribution to the world is often found in the redemption of your weakest seasons." And Jesus meets the woman at the well, and She's an outcast from society. And a lot of that's actually not her fault culturally. And he meets her out there in the heat of the day because she's presumably too embarrassed to go and draw her water in the cool of the evening or the cool of the morning when the rest of the women would have done that. She's out there by herself, and she ends up meeting Jesus, and Jesus offers her eternal life. And John's gospel in chapter 4 says she goes back and tells everyone about this guy. I met this guy and he told me everything about me. He understood everything about me. He actually saw her, and she becomes like one of the very first evangelists. Here's what the Apostle Paul wrote to the church in Corinth. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is perfected in weakness. Therefore, Paul says, I will most gladly boast all the more about my weakness. I take pleasure in weakness, insults, hardships, persecutions, and in difficulties for the sake of Christ. For when I am weak, then I am strong. And as we mourn the loss of and celebrate the life of Matthew Perry, I thank God that he found faith and that he used this massive setback in this long, drawn-out season of pain and suffering, addiction, just going down further and further into darkness. And he used that to turn that around and influence so many people. And he brought a lot of people happiness with his character, Chandler Bing, on the show Friends. But I think his greatest work actually came from the contributions he made, helping other people find hope in the midst of their addictions. If you enjoyed this clip, make sure you check out the full podcast and subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay up to date with all new content. You can also support the channel at patreon.com/Clayton Tyner. Link is in the description below.